Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our DAT weekly market update. This is our update for August 22nd, 2023. I'm Ken Adamo, Chief of Analytics over here at DAT, joined by Dean Croak, who's our Principal Industry Analyst. And we have a very special guest this week joining the program. We have Rico Muhammad, dedicated Clemson Tiger fan, arch enemy of the Buckeyes over the past few years, but we're thrilled to have him on the program this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Rico, I have fond memories that faded into dim memories of that 31-0 New Year's Eve beatdown a few years ago that my liver will never really fully recover from, I don't think.
Well, you guys got off the snide, and y'all got one up. This the last time we faced each other, so kudos to the Buckeyes.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm really looking forward to it, obviously, as I have dressed. This is the last show for several months before we won't have college football to talk about, the NFL starting back up. Really exciting stuff. But that's not what we're here to talk about this week. We're here to talk about trends in the freight market. We're here every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern. There is a lot going on, so we're going to jump into it. But before we do, I wanted to ask Rico to introduce himself for those who might not be familiar before we bring him back at the end to talk about our question of the week.
Absolutely. Well, I'm Rico Muhammad. I'm a small motor carrier. Have a couple of trucks, just two really, but I focus on a primary area of target of operation, which I focus on small little niche refrigerated carrier, and we also have a little podcast that we do as well. So we try to help people out and share our successes and failures with real world experience that people can relate to and help them kind of give them more tools in their toolbox to make them and their operation a little bit more successful. More focused on smaller guys than the bigger guys.
I love it. One of the things that makes Dean awesome at booking folks to come on our show is we cover all facets of the industry. So not just brokers, not just shippers, but small and large carriers alike. So I'm sure folks are going to have a lot of questions for you, Rico. I'm going to ask them to put them in the chat section of LinkedIn or YouTube, and we will bring you back in a few minutes for a great discussion in a few minutes. So let's get to our points of the week. Dean has a jam-packed list of things here for me this morning. So spot rates are continuing to just middle about within 3% of 2019 levels. Load post, the lowest since 2016 as demand continues to soften. Housing starts up a bit, but really insufficient to boost flatbed demand. I think that's being kind. When we look at some of the flatbed data here in a bit, you're going to see why. Slower summer up north from a cross-border perspective, down 42% month over month and 18% year over year. Leasing is still a better option than owner-operator by about $11,000 a year versus spot market ICs. ICs standing for independent contractors. No shift back to independent owner-operator status anytime soon. We are seeing the net motor carrier numbers trend back towards equilibrium. I don't think they'll hit this month with the drop in fuel, but that's something we watch very closely. And then the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association increased predictions of near-term tropical activity. I think there's like 5 storms brewing in the Atlantic. Hopefully most of them are fish storms. And we all know that Hillary just walloped the hurricane, if you will, Southern California. So with that, we'll turn it over to Dean for our market update this week. Dean. So apparently, Dean is coming to us live from a fishbowl at the moment. We're going to let him sort out his audio for just a second. It looks like he's back. Back to Dean. All right. It looks like we're hammering out some technical difficulties here. You know what? It's the preseason, right? We're still in training camp. We're just ironing out all of the kinks here as we try to come live to you. Dean, are we back? I don't think he's back. Yeah. I can start to cover some of this stuff. I'll do a poor Dean imitation, and then as soon as he's back, my producer will tap me on the shoulder, and we'll go back to Dean. We'll start with the Drivein load to truck ratios, and I think what you're seeing is just that similarity to 2019 becoming very evident. We're about to pass through where last year the purple line fell back down. And that's just kind of like the pattern that I think we're going to be in for the balance of the year. We always talked about week in and week out on the show that the most likely scenario for this year is that it's going to closely follow the shape of 2019. And I think, unfortunately, that is what's actually panning out. Rates don't have too much further to fall, but again, that just seems to be where we are. Let's move to refrigerated really quick, because this one is really trending on top of 2019 from a load to truck ratio perspective. That's that mint green line, if you will. And when you look at activity, this is kind of a double whammy. We're seeing load posts down and truck posts up, which is what's really putting downward pressure on these metrics. It's not any one of the two specific variables. It's both working in unison too. And I'm hearing Dean's dulcet tones in the background, so we're going to kick it back to him so he can get you all the actual information you need.
Sorry about that, everyone. All of the travel has screwed up all of my settings. But anyway, we'll kick off where Ken left off there on the reefer load to truck ratio. We'll flip over to the flatbed load to truck ratio. Volumes continue to fall last week. And to give you a sense of just how soft the flatbed market is, last week's spot market volume was around a quarter of what they were this time in 2018, which of course was a good year for flatbed carriers. Carrier equipment post down, load to truck ratio down to 5.45. That's about the lowest we've seen in many years, certainly going back to about 2016. Having a quick look at some of our markets, we'll have a look at the West Coast first. California outbound drive rates at $1.99 are about 8 cents a mile higher than where they were in 2019. They've dropped about 18 cents a mile since the start of July. In the Los Angeles spot market is the largest in the state. Outbound rates fell for the fourth week to $1.79, while in nearby Ontario, loads were paying carriers $1.88. In Northern California, Stockton is another big warehouse market. Capacity continues to loosen following last week's 6 cents per mile decrease to $1.71. Outbound rates in the Midwest, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio at about $1.95 last week, identical to this time in 2019. Some solid gains were reported for carriers in the Toledo market, rates up 6 cents a mile to $1.81. Having a look at the market condition index in the refrigerated category, Apple Harvest continues to push some more volumes into the market in the northern tier of the country. Pacific Northwest in particular, volumes starting to climb there. Load posts up 12% last week. In the larger Pendleton reefer market, volumes are up 14% last week. And on the high volume lane to Los Angeles out of Pendleton, loads were paying carriers $1.36. That's about 20 cents a mile higher than this time last year. I took a look at our Ratecast forecasting.
That. All right. I think Dean has got the tech curse this morning. So if we can, we'll bring it back. But we're going to get to our forecast model discussion, because this is the point in the program that I actually am prepared for. So we always start with Drivein. This is long haul only. We stretch it a little bit here. That this is only 550 miles and above. We're just trying to really take out all of that short haul friction that occurs. And it goes back to March 1st, 2023. And it's a 7-day weighted moving average, just to keep the line smooth. So the blue line is history. And then we have 4 forecast models for you. We've got green, which is a flagship Ratecast model. That's in all of our products, whether it's RateView, RFP Tool, etc. The red line is the short-term model. It more heavily, or in this case, more extremely weights short-term data. And then you've got yellow and gray, which are kind of intermediate models that look at both long and short-term data. And what you see here is Ratecast essentially bottoming out. If you remember weeks prior, Ratecast was essentially showing a march upwards, and you're starting to see some of that expectation in the model tempered mainly by rising fuel prices. So as they've talked about on the show many times, in the short term, increases in fuel prices will reduce what we allocate as we call base, right? Because typically speaking, small carriers are not able to negotiate the entirety of the increase in fuel expense when dealing with a broker. So that's what you're seeing here. And then the short-term model essentially just assuming down, 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 which again, I don't think is realistic, but it is something we're keeping an eye on at the moment. Let's go to refrigerated, because these models are going to be in a little bit more alignment. The three models, being the two intermediate models and the short-term model, aren't overly pessimistic like they are with Drivein here, but you're seeing Ratecast with some optimism heading into the fall shipping season. Again, not a ton of disagreement here, but then also, again, not a ton of optimism as we head into that tail half of the third quarter. And then ending on a bit of a down note, we have Flatbed here. Pretty much all four models are in agreement, at least on directionality. The short-term model has a more steep decline. Ratecast not as steep with some leveling at the end, and then the intermediate models splitting the difference. So we're going to jump back to Dean to jump around a bit and wrap up our market update. Back to you, Dean.
Yeah, the long-form version of this report, everything I would have covered in the last little while will be on the DAT.com website tonight. But just to quickly wrap up our end of report look at spot rates. Drivein rates slid a little bit further last week, dropped a penny per mile to $1.58. That's just 2 cents a mile above 2019 levels. Looking at some of our high volume lanes, our top 50 lanes averaged $1.91. That's 32 cents a mile lower than the national, or higher than the national average. My apologies. In the refrigerated market, rates remained flat last week. That's the second week they've been sitting at about $1.95 per mile. Remember, that's excluding fuel. That's 35 cents a mile lower than last year and about 7 cents per mile higher than in 2019. And lastly, with flatbed, at $1.92 per mile, the national average is about 38 cents a mile lower than last year. It's about 7 cents a mile higher than this time in 2019. Since this year's high of $2.16, which was recorded in the first week of June, spot rates have been steadily downhill, on a steady downhill run, dropping about 24 cents a mile since then. All right, so forecast is done. With time to dive into the question of the week and bring Rico back in. Rico, one of the things that we've seen in the last week is it's almost a 61 cents a gallon surge in diesel prices. So I wanted to start off the discussion asking you about how you've been managing the surge in fuel prices on both your dedicated and spot market lanes.
Great question, Dean. The main way that we try to handle it here is that we have relationships with our customers. And so we have those discussions. When we start to see it, we don't go back to them every single time there's a slight little bump or a single little fluctuation. But when there's a significant bump in increase in the rate of fuel, then we go back and try to have those discussions. We try to have those, keep that open line of communication. It's very difficult to have that if you don't have a relationship with your customers, whether you have a direct customer or whether you're dealing with brokers. You have to make sure that your relationship is on solid ground, that you've done the work to develop that relationship, and that you're delivering value in order to kind of keep the relationship going and in a healthy state. You got to make sure that you're delivering value to your customers so that you can have those type of discussions.
Rico, fascinating stuff. You started off your life as a owner or operator, right? But exclusively in the spot market. And more recently, though, you've sort of graduated to more dedicated work. Is that correct?
Well, actually, I started out in the freight business. My very first start was back with MS Carriers. That's where I very first started out. Wow. Anybody remembers Old Moving Start? Yeah. That's where I got my training and all that stuff started back many years ago. Then I transitioned over to I worked for Saya Motor Freight for about 10, 12 years, somewhere in that ballpark. So I've pulled the doubles and all that type of stuff and done that as well. Also did casual with the Yellow Roadway for a little while. But once I opened my own, I started my own motor carrier. I started straight out the gate. With my own authority, owner operator, operating strictly in the spot market, and the tools that I used to help me be somewhat successful then was DAT's Rate View. That was when I very first started out. I mean, my first couple of runs, I was like, I was ignorant to the fact of not understanding rates and lanes, not understanding that one particular rate that you got going one way, you didn't necessarily get coming back the other way. I knew how to drive a truck, but I didn't understand the business of trucking.
Right.
And that was trying to make that connection to understand that coming out of Florida may not necessarily net me the same rate as coming out of say Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah.
And that was a quick and hard awakening when I very first got started.
Yeah. You one of the things we talked about on the Rates and Lanes podcast that you co-host with Chuck Snow was we talk a lot about over the last couple of years cost per mile, like know your operating costs. You mentioned something about the new feature on our load board that you found particularly helpful in terms of operating costs.
Absolutely, the feature that you guys have on there, where people that pay for the load board can actually input their numbers. My co-host Chuck Snow, he likes to say that we're not necessarily truckers; we're accountants with CDLs, and we have to understand our numbers, and that's the biggest thing that we have to make sure that we are aware of, that we are keeping our pulse on the figure of the numbers of our business, and we should be doing that on a monthly, weekly, daily kind of snapshot. We should be looking at our P&Ls. If we've never seen a P&L, we need to make sure that we get proper bookkeeping and accounting, but we need to understand intimately our cost of operation. And that's the difference between knowing whether or not you hear the mantra, especially a lot on social media and owner operators all the time. You even see them with stickers on the back of the trailer, say no to cheap freight. Well, what's cheap freight? What's cheap to you may not be cheap to me. So you have to understand, in order to understand what is cheap. Now, I don't advocate operating at a loss. I mean, we're a for-profit business. We're not a charity, but in order to understand that, we have to understand our numbers intimately. And the only way to do that is to track them. And if you're not tracking them and letting the numbers make decisions for your business and for whatever loads that you haul, then you are quickly going to find yourself, in a real precarious situation.
Gotcha.
I think that the say no to cheap freight and some of the rate per mile stuff has done more damage to the small owner operator industry than just about any other. We used to have active campaigns when I was in the industry to counteract that disinformation, right? We'd always try to get folks to understand it's price and quantity, right? Like it's your total revenue offset against your total monthly expenses. And that's just something you've got to keep in mind. I think you did a good job of explaining why all of the factors are important.
That's the key point. The main thing that unfortunately, a lot of smaller carriers are not as sophisticated as the larger carriers. And unfortunately, starting out, our accounting system is, do I have any money left over at the end of the week?
Yeah.
That's not good enough. We got to be more disciplined. We got to be more in tune and in touch with the intimacy of the numbers of the operation. And that is the only way that we can operate successfully and keep ourselves, that's the way that we keep the doors open.
Yeah, we'd run these studies, Rico, where, we'd bring truckers in, small owner operators in and ask them, so you said no to the cheap freight. It may have been like a $2 a mile load from Jackson, Mississippi up to Chicago. Mm-hmm. And they're like, well, I said no to that because it was $2 a mile and I can't run for $2 a mile. And we're like, well, what'd you do instead?
Right.
Well, I deadheaded to Atlanta, however many miles that is, empty. And then I took a 45,000 pound shipment of bagged rice. And I had to pay for a truck wash, and I had to pay. So did you actually say no to cheap freight, or did you just actually lose money on a load because you didn't get, and then you landed on a Saturday as opposed to a Thursday or a Friday?
And that's the biggest thing. Like I tell small guys, if you don't have a huge fleet, if you don't have, I would say maybe 5 or more trucks, you can't be all things to all people. And you have to understand where your niche is and where you can be successful. So you can't compete with the Snyders, the Swifts, the Knights, and things of that nature by running all over the country. You have to find something specifically that you can do, that you have to find your value proposition to people that are in the area that you want to serve. And that's the key. That, to me, that is really the key to insulating yourself from the volatile swings of the spot market. Otherwise, you are going to be held at the mercy of that spot market, and unfortunately, you're gonna get what comes with that.
Rico, question for you: revenue per truck day or rate per mile? Where should carriers focus?
I would say, Dean, that that's a question that has to be answered based on the area of operation.
Right.
I operate within less than a 500-mile radius. So for me, on one end, like for instance, I'll give an example for myself. On my direct customer that I have here in Atlanta, I make enough money to go to my destination in North Carolina, which is only 222 miles away one way. It's only 222 miles one way. I make enough money to turn that trip off of that one direct customer. Now I can operate in the spot market on a per mile basis because on that lane right there, I'm getting. I don't mind sharing my numbers. I get $1,500 on that one particular load. So it's 220 miles. I get $1,500 on that particular one run. Now, if I can operate coming back out of North Carolina, if I can get anywhere from $850 per mile coming back down to Atlanta, Georgia, and mind you, that's all in this, I can pretty much turn it if everything works out correctly according to my logs. I can do that in one day. So so my direct customer ships out of Atlanta 3 days a week. I'm shipping out of Atlanta every Sunday, Tuesday, and Wednesday.
Gotcha.
I'm sorry, Tuesdays and Fridays.
Got it. Hey, one of the things our listeners probably can't see is your logo on your shirt, which is, of course, Crescent Carriers.
Yes.
And I wanted to just talk about some of the idea behind branding, right? Because you have a very consistent image across your entire business, whether it's your truck, trailer, everything. Speak about the importance of having even though you're a small fleet owner, of the importance of having, a brand right down to your uniform.
Well, I try to take success leaves footprints. And one of the things that I try to talk about, even though I'm small or whatever, I try to present myself as a professional. I want to be I consider myself to be a professional. So what does the industry leaders in our profession have? One thing that I look at that I admire is UPS. If you look at UPS, you always see their guys. They're always kind of clean. They have a set uniform. They keep their trucks clean. So I think that, trying to mimic some of the successful things that successful companies have done is very important in order to kind of help set yourself apart. Because people, I think that when people recognize that, they see the small little things, they see the small little nuances, and it's one less thing that I have to think about. I don't have to think about what I'm going to wear today or whatever. I know I'm working. I have a uniform, so I either have my shirts printed up. I have either these Dickie type style shirts, and I have some T-shirts printed up. Even in the wintertime, I have hoodies. But this is all things that you got to wear clothes anyway. And if you have your own business, why not put your brand out there? Why not have something that you can give to customers? I mean, all of these different little things that you can do that can help endear and build. I talked about relationships earlier. Give somebody a calendar. Give somebody a T-shirt. Hey, what size you wear? Give them a hat. Right. All of these things. Not necessarily saying that you're buttering anybody up, but it helps kind of build rapport with potential customers and people like that, and it helps separate you and people remember you. Hey, I remember that guy. And it helps open up conversations.
Yeah, hard to forget. Brake check week, how's that gone so far?
I hardly ever get inspected, Dean. People, I try to stay on top of. My maintenance at all times.
Right.
So by doing that, keeping the trucks clean, I run the same routes. As long as if I don't see anything glaring standing out, you're not going to get bothered. But now if you're running down the road and you got the ABS light is lit up on the back of the trailer, or you got lights out, marker lights out and stuff like that, those small little things are normally the things that they are looking for to pull you over. Normally, normally I operate mainly in the evenings, at nighttime when there's less traffic. So a lot of times, sometimes scales are not even open when I'm coming through. So that's another benefit of having a lane that I service all the time. I have a set time on which I do most of my stuff, so it works out pretty good for me. But yeah, just try to make sure that you keep your equipment properly serviced at all times. That'll keep the DOT off your backside.
Yeah. It's pretty hard to do with trailer pools, right? Because a lot of the folks following behind you see the trailer. The first thing they see is the trailer. So you're an easy mark, I think, if your trailer pools aren't well maintained. But for a lot of power-only guys, that's where they get caught up. Not so much with the tractor, but the trailer.
Right. And that's the great thing about controlling my own equipment.
Right. Hey, Rico, one of the things I saw popping up yesterday on some of the chat boards around social media was someone said, is this a good time to buy a truck? And the overwhelming response was yes, mainly because truck prices have dropped. But then people weren't really talking about some of the basic fundamentals of running a truck. Someone said you've got to keep your finance costs under $1,000 per month. Probably pretty hard to do. You've got to buy a decent used truck. You've got to also have a pretty good down payment. What would you say to someone that's saying, I'm going to get into the trucking business in 2023?
I would say that if you are prepared to, first of all, understand the dynamics of the business, and make sure that because the financial component is a really, really tricky one. I don't, as an independent operator, I started out, these are all the mistakes that I made coming in. I had really good situation with I had a factoring company, but I had a really good factoring company. I no longer factor any of my loads anymore. But it took time to get to that point. Having a relationship with the bank, I can't stress this enough, ladies and gentlemen. If you hadn't heard the theme of what I'm talking about, relationships, go get relationships with a banker, with the customer. You got to be relatable to people, and if you do that, if you got relationships with banks, then you can get better terms with a bank that you're dealing with or a credit union that you're dealing with, versus going out and dealing with these commercial lenders and stuff like that. Now, if you have to go that route, if that's the only route that is available to you, then you have to do what you have to do. But build the relationship with the financial institutions. You can get great interest rates, even on business loans and things of that nature. Business credit cards. You have to do, these are the fundamental things that you have to do to kind of build yourself up and put yourself in a position to do those things. A lot of times with trucking, because there's such a low barrier of entry into the industry, people just jump in and don't necessarily have their ducks in a row. You got to I would say, have a game plan, have everything mapped out, have get your business name, get your EIN number, get all that stuff set up properly, get the banking account, get those relationships developed. And once you got that stuff in place, then finding it's much easier to go to a trucking lot when you've already got, just like a car lot. If you already got your financing in place and you've already got money, you've already got a check, you know how much money that you're going to get. It's real easy to go find the truck. But now just don't pick out a truck just because, it's red or it's orange, to play on the Buckeye Clemson thing. You got to understand how to buy a truck, how to properly buy a truck, and how to vet that truck before you actually invest into it to make sure that you're getting a really good truck. Are you pulling ECM reports? Or do you have an oil sample on the truck? All these different things that you should know about the history of a truck, especially if it's used, before you jump out there and do something of that nature.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've got a couple of questions in there, Ken. We might do that before we wrap up. What do you think?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Rico, he mentioned he's worked at Saya and a bit at Yellow. What do you think of the demise of Yellow?
I think it's very sad. It's very unfortunate. I hate to see, I still knew a few people over there at Yellow Roadway. And it's very unfortunate that happened. I think the writing probably has been on the wall for a few years over there. When I was over there years ago, man, I made more money over there as a casual than I did on my full-time job working weekends only. Line haul over there. I was working in the city for another little freight company that also went out of business a couple of years back. But I used to make more money on the weekends over there working casual than I did working in the city 5 days a week.
I tell you what, some of the folks in the C-suite over there probably would have actually done a little bit better had they listened to some of your financial advice. You could open up a little shop, CPAs for CDLs.
Man, I tell you, that's a rough one. My heart goes out to the ladies and gentlemen over there that are unfortunately find themselves out of a job.
Yeah, that's what I think most people lose sight of. It's not their fault that the company went under, right? All right, Dean, couple questions.
Yeah, a couple of questions. Amy McIntyre and Yamapa ask really two questions sort of around the same subject. When do we think rates will go back up? Certainly, will they go back up before the end of the year? And the second part of that question is, do we think they're going to get better before Q1 of next year?
I mean, they'll definitely get better for peak. Q1, I mean, the first quarter is the worst, unless you're in the returns business. Q1's the worst year in the freight calendar by far, right? January, February, March. So I think you'll have a pretty decent peak this fall. It will slow back down dramatically into Q1, and then I would look for recovery in Q2. I think that's probably the most likely, the likeliest of scenarios. Rates will certainly flip year over year positive in that window, right? They'll be lapping extraordinarily soft comps heading into next year. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, yeah. All right. We probably should do some quick plugins.
Before we do that, let's roll. I think we got a video here to highlight DATCon, which our producer will roll in 1 second. I did want to mention that if you go to register for DATCon and you enter code GOBUCKS, GOBUCKS, all one word, all caps, you will get a substantial discount off the entry price. And just don't come to DATCon if you're from Michigan. I'm just kidding. We welcome all states. But I just won't talk to you. All right, roll the video.
Through the course of these next 2 days, there's no better chance for us to get your input and answer your questions in one really great collaborative event.
We have so much innovation going on and so much investment, so I can't wait to share this. This is exciting. We're using AI and machine learning and intelligence so you get action right away.
It's about bringing together all aspects of the network to solve your problems.
And we know that you all move faster if you provide that connected experiences for you.
We are trying to make it easier for you to use our products. It's going to continue in 23, and this is a testament to that. With 2 million trucks in our app, all of the stuff in the network, all of the knowledge in this room, we can legitimately change this industry.
They selectively edited out, Rico, the fact that a massive sign fell during our keynote and almost decapitated me on stage. That didn't make the sizzle reel, but it's still very much front of my mind. You want to hit us with some plugs, Dean?
Yeah, Sales Chatter tomorrow, Dan Deegan. We're on 11 a.m. Eastern. Robert Rouse is on Landline now, as always, 7 p.m. on Sirius XM. I'm on this week with Lindsay Lawler, a famous rock and roll artist on Radio Nemo. We're actually on live at 7:30 a.m. for an hour and a half, talking about life on the road. Professor Chris Kaplis, the Freightline podcast out, has got Alex Leslie from Atri talking about their operational cost report. We've just covered DATCon. CBS Break Week is on this week. Look for some service failures, I'm sure. For those in the broking community, there'll be a lot of trucks caught up in this. And with that, it's back to Ken to wrap up the show.
All right. I want to thank Rico for joining us. And all y'all for hanging in there through some of our tech difficulties today. We will be back next week at 10 a.m. Eastern. Again, we're already setting attendance records for this far out for DATCon, so I highly recommend getting in there and registering if you plan on attending. It's in a hub city this year in Houston, so it should be a lot easier to get to than in some years prior. And we look forward to seeing you there. So with that, we will see you back here next week. I hope everyone enjoys the first week of college football as we've beat to death on this show, and have a safe rest of your week. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.